Okay, so it's 4 o'clock. Let's start on time. My name is Alison Meston, and I'm the Director of Communications with the International Science Council. And I'm delighted to be with you today for this knowledge sharing session on online conferencing. What a year it's been. Who would have thought that we would be in this position when we started the year? That we would suddenly be learning and pivoting for all of our conferencing, whether it's just a single meeting with a colleague or a broader conference. I know many of the International Science Council's members, particularly science unions, have changed the way they've done conferencing this year. So we thought that it would be a good idea to bring everyone together and have some ideas around online conferencing. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a number of guest speakers. This session is being recorded, and I would kindly ask that you mute yourselves until we get to the discussion. So we're going to hear from Pieter Swart, who is a professional conference organiser, and he's going to tell us, first of all, how we can reimagine conferencing in these times. We're then going to hear from the ISC's Digital Communications Officer, Zhenya Tsoy, and she's going to just give us some basic background information on the different platforms that you can use. We're then going to hear from Veronika Schaeffler from INASP, the International Network for the Availability of Science Publications. And she's going to give some examples of success on how to go digital. And then I'm really looking forward to hearing from Wesley Shrum, who's one of our members from the 4S. So that's the Society for Social Studies of Science. And I know that Wesley's association for a long time has been doing some very innovative things when conferencing was the old-fashioned way. So I'm really looking forward, Wesley, from hearing from you on how your organisation is now coping in the digital sphere. And then finally, we'll hear from Sam Lanfranco from the Society for the Advancement of Science in Africa, SASA. SASA is one of our newer international ISC members. And then we'll have an informal discussion. And it's during that time of the informal discussion where we can have, I encourage you to raise your questions and make sure that you unmute yourself when you talk, but please also use the chat function on the side. So you'll see that Anne has already placed the agenda in there. I have to say, from a personal point of view, I don't know how you're all feeling, but I'm certainly feeling a bit zoomed out and have Zoom fatigue. And I think one of the challenges that we're going to face next year is that this pandemic is going to continue and that we're going to have to, as a science community, ensure that we really have professional ways of gathering. So before this pandemic happened, I've put this in chat, I bought a book by Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering, because already at the beginning of the year, I felt that the communities that I had been involved with, whether that was the science community or UN communities before I came to the International Science Council, I thought, gee, conferences have become, I think we could be doing better. So I bought this book and I highly recommend it. And Priya talks about going back to actually, why are we gathering? And I think for me as a human being this year, the ability for us to gather has completely changed because of the pandemic. So the first thing we're going to do today is a very quick poll about how you're all feeling about Zoom meetings. And so I'm going to ask Anne to put that poll up. So it's a quick question about, are you and your colleagues and or members experiencing Zoom fatigue? And so there's a number of options. Yes, and we are looking for other options. Yes, but we don't have the capacity to address Zoom fatigue. Yes, but Zoom seems to be the best option. or no, because we know how to keep our audience focused and engaged. So let's just see how we're all feeling. I think we could probably end the poll now. So I think it looks like 59% of us are a bit zoomed out, but feel like Zoom is the best option. And coming in next at 25%, so a quarter of you are yes, we are zoomed out and looking at other options. And 13% are saying we don't have the capacity to address Zoom fatigue. And there are 16%, so a smaller amount, saying that we know how to keep our audience focused and engaged. So that's really great to see, and that's what today's about. So, and should I stop sharing those results, or will you stop? I'll stop. No, I'll just close.
Sorry, I think I just did.
Okay. If you're still seeing a poll in front of you, you can press close. Okay, so that gives us a good indication of where we're at. So I'm now delighted to welcome Pieter Swart, who's going to give us a presentation on reimagining the future events. So it's over to you, Pieter.
Well, thank you very much, Alison, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody and connecting from where you are. I see that we've got about 42 people online. It would actually be interesting to see on a map where everybody is connecting from. So I'm going to share some insights on reimagining the future of events. And I'm afraid for that we sort of needed a crystal ball. And because all the crystal balls are sold out, I think we need to make do with what we have. So the experiences of the past couple of months, I think, is an extremely good indication of where we are heading in terms of the future. We, over the past couple of years, have spent a lot of time perfecting within the events environment what we've been doing. So we are moving now from a best practice environment to a next practice environment. And within a next practice environment, we can accept that we are all learning, even the experienced amongst us, and we are in a time of forgiveness. So what is very clear at the moment is that I think our online audiences will be expecting a lot more of us going into the future. So if you have to look at short-term, medium-term, and long-term, short-term is what we can expect to happen in the next year, medium-term, the next 2 to 3 years, and then longer-term, 4 to 5 years. So for short-term, all the material, all the studies, all the polls, and all the information that we've received from industry colleagues point in the direction that we are pretty much going to experience what we've been doing right now. So what we had before, can we call that analog events, and then having to transform into the digital space of online events or virtual events. That is going to be our future for the next year. So I think we can safely say that very limited events will be taking place in person. Those that are taking place in person will definitely have an online or a digital component to it. So we are talking hybrid conferences. But for the most, at present, short-term outlook, 80%, according to the Professional Convention Management Association predictions, is that those events will be full digital events. And that we are only looking at a return to in-person events towards the latter part of 2022 and even 23. So online and digital events are here, and they are here to stay. What we had before as a centralized meeting where everybody had to travel from where they were into a central destination, we are already hearing a lot more questions being asked as to why do I need to travel halfway around the world to sit in a meeting room, keep quiet, listen to a presentation, and perhaps make some connections, but that could be done in different ways as well, and then have to fly back to my destination. So we are getting those type of questions from a cost point of view, from a time point of view, and time is cost, we all know that, and from an ecological point of view. Think of the carbon footprints and the consumption of CO2 whilst traveling towards events. So online events really do have a lot more benefits at the moment than in-person events. For starters, it makes events possible. So with that, I want to ask a question, and this is a question perhaps for each one of your organizations to think about, and that is the value of your events, the meeting, and whether you view those events as assets for your organizations. If you do view those events as assets, then you have to treat them like assets. You have to protect them, you have to develop them, and you have to grow them. And those assets need to talk to your organizational objectives, and they need to talk to your constituents' objectives. So why are you doing those events? If the event is not an asset, probably getting rid of it would be a better option then, because then it serves absolutely no purpose. So that brings us to the understanding of events. And we in the events industry, and we are talking to each other here as colleagues almost, is that we do understand that an event can never be an objective. It is merely a platform to achieve an objective. And once we understand exactly what those objectives are, then we can design those events according to needs. And this is what is coming out of the polls. Online events is the best that we have at the moment. We are growing, we are learning, and we are experiencing better products being developed all the time. So with that said, from an organizational aspect, understanding the true value of those events and how those events are addressing the needs. Yeah, we are in uncharted territories. Pretty much not having the blueprint, not having the book of how to do this properly. As said before, we are learning, and we have to understand that not everything may be exactly as we want it to be, because it does take time to learn and to make those transitions and to translate what we have to do into our capabilities. So I want to refer people back to where do we look for solutions? If we have to train for the digital event environment, how do we prepare ourselves? One of the solutions that's being offered by the Professional Convention Management Association is through their Digital Experience Institute. And you can study within a 5-month period what the strategies and the applications for online events are. And you can therefore also obtain a certification as a digital event strategist. So those are one of the sources when we are looking for information out there on how to do what we need to do. So that brings us to a couple of key learnings from our perspectives of making the transition from in-person events to online events. And the major difference that we've experienced from an in-person to an online environment is that an in-person environment is a projection of content from one to many. In the online environment, it is a projection of content from one to one broadcasted to many. And that in itself gives us the first clue of how we need to design our online engagements. So the second major learning is that when we made the transition from in-person events to digital events, one of the very first things that we discovered is that we are still dealing with all the elements that we used in the planning of an in-person event. You still have to have your strategic considerations. You still have to define your objectives. You still need to define your outcomes and then plan according to that. You still need to do a budget. You still need to do a project plan. You are still constructing your programs. You are still having your speaker engagements. You are still doing your registration services for the connection into the online environment. You are still doing your marketing and you are still doing your communication. So where people originally thought that it's much easier to organize online events, big mistake. It is actually a lot more difficult, because what you are now doing is that you have a very small team of centralized people in an organization that have to take over the shared responsibilities that was previously done by all different third-party suppliers. And what we have to think about is that an online event is really only the replacement of the facility. Where you had a physical facility, we are now transforming that physical facility into a cloud-based facility, an online facility or a digital facility. For the rest, it takes exactly the same effort, if not more, from your organization to plan a digital event, and therefore afforded appropriate time to do the planning to get it done properly. Having said that, understanding that all those different components apply, bear in mind that you have to focus on each one of those components and have yourself a little focus team discussing the different approaches and the impact of the online event environment onto each of those different components. Because, as said, all those components still apply, but they are being applied differently to the online environment. We are basically now entering a technology-rich environment. So if we talked about in-person events as analog events, and we talk about online events as digital events, the clue in that is the data heaviness of the environment we are moving into now. So one of the immediate benefits of the online events is the fact that we can extract so much more data from an engagement. If we are going the high-end platforms, one of the big benefits is that you now have access to data and data on engagement that never existed before, where people had to give you that information. Now that information can be extracted from platforms. And having said that, one of the reasons why it's so difficult to do online events is because of all these millions of spinning gears. And all of those have to align perfectly in order to deliver an online event. So in the in-person environment, what we experienced previously is that if you had an incident, it was probably an isolated, it was limited to only a couple of people that were impacted by it, could be fixed because you had many resources to address it, you can move on. Very different scenario with the online environment. We are dependent for so many things to come together. And especially when we are looking at data and the data management and data accessibility. If any one of those things fall over, you can actually lose your entire event. You can disconnect. So risk mitigation shifted from health and safety in an in-person environment to data security in the online environment. So my time is up. I need to be cautious on how I'm managing my time. And I'll be returning with some insights post in the discussion phase. And in the meantime, I'll also be posting some insights into the chat box. But thank you very much, and thank you for joining today. Back to you, Alison.
Thank you, Pieter. And again, I think you reiterated what I was saying. You know, when you said if you have an event, because you've always had an event, have a think about the why of you actually having that event. And I think again that goes back to what I said before about why this book, The Art of Gathering, spoke to me. We have to, now more than ever when we need scientific collaboration, we really need to be purposeful about why we gather, and this is in person and online. And if I can just, I don't know about you all online today, and we can talk about this in the chat, but one of the things that has struck me, and again, Pieter talked about this, was organising an online event takes almost the same time as organising an in-person event. So where you might have trouble with people's aeroplane tickets or visas, you then have trouble with people's computers or headphones or sound or issues like that. And again, you know, Pieter raised the issue of professionalism. So we've had nearly a year of Zooms. We need to be thinking next year, how are we going to gather online? How are we going to be professional? And what different modalities can we use to have conferencing online that really speaks to that purpose of why we're gathering and what our goals are for bringing people together. So I think that's a very good segue to now bring in Zhenya, who's going to share with you some very practical slides from the different online formats that you can use. Thank you, Zhenya. Over to you.
Thank you, Alison. Hi, everybody. My name is Zhenya Tsoy. I'm working with Anne and Alison at the IAC on digital communications primarily. And today we'll be talking about platforms for online interactions. So to set the stage, I will start with an overview of our experience in 2020 and different events that we held online. Then we'll touch upon different types of interactions and what platform is most suitable for each. We'll also have a look at various features which are available on various platforms, how much they cost, and I'll finish off with a few fun add-ons for your meetings. So in 2020, we had 16 public events. And they varied greatly in size, from smaller ones where we had only 50 registrations to bigger ones with several hundreds. And on average, we had about 260 registrations. Attendance was also okay. We had about 52%, so 1 in 2 people who signed up actually attended the event. And retention rate was 68%, meaning about 7 in 10 people who signed up for our events also decided to opt in for our newsletter. And I wanted to dwell on this statistics a little bit more because it was very important for us to have this high retention rate. It was a nice addition to having online events because bringing in so many highly relevant people who are seeking our content was a great way to grow our mailing lists and to build long-term relationships with these users. Back to the basics, some of the types of interactions. So the simplest one is a one-on-one, which is a regular call, many-to-many, when you have a group meeting where everybody can talk. Then you have one-to-many, where one or a few people are talking at the audience, and finally a mixture of several. So it might seem obvious, but then there are so many events, so many webinars, for example, which might be better served on a meeting platform instead. That's why, for example, this meeting is a Zoom meeting, not a Zoom webinar, because we want to talk with you, not at you, and to exchange knowledge and have a more horizontal platform. And at the same time, there are a lot of meetings which could be better served on a webinar platform where you have more control, more organization, fewer distractions. So at the ISC, we started with a regular meeting platform such as GoToMeeting and Zoom Meeting, but we soon realized that we wanted to have richer experiences. So we wanted to be able to record our sessions, we wanted to be able to have polls and Q&A, and it was all good and well. We were very happy with the Zoom webinar platform. But then again, at some point we thought we actually want to do even more. We want to have something closer to a real in-person experience where people can network, where you can have parallel sessions and jump between them. We wanted to be able to feature our sponsors or partners and friends in the expo section. So all of these features were not available on standard webinar platforms. So we started looking into various other options. And this is just a small overview of a few platforms that we liked, that suited our needs. And by no means it's an exhaustive list. There are just way too many to cover in this short presentation on this small slide. But this is just to give you an idea of what kind of features you might be looking out for, and also how much all of this might cost. So cost was, of course, one of the biggest considerations, and we found out that there are a lot of hidden fees, a lot of features which are locked up behind more expensive plans. So this is some of the things that we found out about these platforms in particular, and we are going to share the slide later on so you can have more time to look at it in more detail. And for the sake of saving time, right now I'm going to focus just on the pricing models. So what we found out that there are primarily three types of pricing models. The first one is paying per platform. So you pay to access the platform, and then you can have a limited or an unlimited number of events. Then the second type is pay per person. So whether it's a person who registers or participates, it might be different from platform to platform. Then you can have the third type, which is pay per event. So it's a flat fee, you pay per event, and then you don't worry about the number of participants who show up or number of registrations that you have. And in the beginning, it was quite difficult to understand what is the most cost-efficient way. Because it's like comparing apples to oranges, right? You have different pricing models. And what was very useful for us is to have a simulation pricing analysis. So we just thought, let's calculate how much it's going to cost on each of the platforms if we have a few big events, or let's say a few small events, or maybe a lot of big events, or maybe a mixture. And then after calculating for each of the scenarios, for us, a clear winner was a subscription fee model where we paid to access the platform, and on top of it, we paid a little bit per each registration. So this is not a product placement for Hopin. This is more of a recommendation to try out this simulation analysis, which is very simple. And this can give you a real insight of what to expect, how much resources you might be expected to put in if you have like a few small events or a lot of big events, and to just give you an idea of how much it might cost on different platforms and make the right choice. Now, if you're not really looking for a whole new platform to hold your events, and you just want to make your existing meetings and events a little bit more fun, here are a few suggestions that are being used by various teams. The obvious one is Trivia, and Kahoot, for example, has been successfully used by many teams for many years. So it's a tried and a trusted platform that you can use to hold all kinds of quizzes, trivia, and etc. Then there are also options for team building and ice-breaking games. For example, Among Us is one of the most popular right now. And as you can judge by the design, it's very simplistic. So it's a way to create a controlled environment where people can have interactions and where they're sort of forced to communicate with each other. And you can use that to make it a little bit less serious and to help people to connect to each other. And finally, you can have your regular meetings, but just change the environment, whether it's just placing everybody's cameras in a simulated virtual room where you share the same space, or maybe it's something that even creates your own avatars and then you're sitting in the virtual room and then you can see avatars of each other. There are many options. Some go as far as to creating their own accounts in simulation games. For example, this Twitter user shared, she said, Zoom sucks. We started having editorial meetings in Red Dead Redemption, which is an online game instead. It's nice to sit at a campfire and discuss projects with the wolves howling out in the night. So this is an extreme example of how you can do it, but it's definitely an option. I'm going to finish off here, but I'm really looking forward to our discussion and hopefully hear some more examples of how you're interacting with your audiences online and whether you have any experience with any of the event platforms. Thank you. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Zhenya. Thank you. That's great. So as Zhenya has showed you, and her presentation will be available, one of the things that was great about our journey at the ISC was that we needed to also look beyond Zoom for some of our meetings. And so we chose Hopin, because it has that ability to have that one-to-one networking. And we tried it out for the first time last week, and we tried it out as a social setting just with our staff, so that the communications team could practice in the back office of the application, and that our staff could get used to it in a social setting. So I think that was a really useful learning process for our team, that we were using a new online experience to replicate a social gathering for just our work colleagues, so that we could really see how it operated. And I have to say, it was the different experience that you had compared to Zoom, where you had that ability to network with someone one-on-one, and then go into the equivalent of a plenary session, and then go into the equivalent of a parallel session, for us was really a unique way to look at how we might do future events next year. And again, going back to what Pieter said, that raison d'être, that real reason why you are gathering. Okay, I'm going to bring in Veronika Schaeffler now from INASP. Veronika, we're looking forward to your presentation, which is going to be a bit more focused on the research and publication community. So over to you.
Thanks for giving me the opportunities to speak about our work with INASP, a small international development organization that is based in Oxford, the UK. I will share now my screen because we have prepared some slides. I hope you can all see this slides now. We partner with global stakeholders to work towards our aim of putting knowledge and research at the heart of development. I'm a member of our technology enhanced learning, short TEL Hub, that supports our projects and partners by providing capacity building solutions that use technology to support learning. Today, I will speak about our approaches of facilitating events and courses in a world where people work and learn more and more online. When we facilitate and design events, then we are guided by digital principles. That are based on our values. Our own guidelines are based on the principles for digital development for international development organizations. You can find them on digitalprinciples.org. Secondly, we learn from our and others' experience to come to an understanding what works and doesn't work. This has helped us to identify key factors that need to be considered before designing any online intervention, and which we then integrated in our own scoping and design process. Thirdly, any learning initiatives that we build are grounded in learning design, meaning we use design methodology that is proved to help with the development of engaging learning opportunities and that lead to the desired learning outcomes. The methodology puts the learner and not the facilitator in the center of the design. And fourthly, when we say technology enhanced, we mean we use technology not as an end in itself. We find out how we can use technology for a specific case to improve the learning experience. This also means that we often complement more traditional face-to-face learning options with online learning. Most of you will surely agree that we had to go through an even more rapid transition to online out of necessity. In the times of a global pandemic, we need to take advantage even more of what digital technology can offer. We need to be more creative. We need to think outside the box. And at the same time, we need to understand the limitations of technology. Therefore, I like to share our experience with implementing and facilitating technology-enhanced learning initiatives. What we learned before COVID-19, but also how we adapted our approaches to the new context. When we develop learning, most of you, I hope you can see now this infographic here. It outlines the key aspects that we identified as being most important for our online learning initiatives. I unfortunately don't have the time to go through, or maybe fortunately, all of them, but I will give you some examples of our experience. If you are interested in learning more, you may want to check out our new tutorial on online facilitation that we recently launched. I will give you more details about that on the last slide then. Our first recommendation is that people and pedagogy should always come before technology. In the years of delivering online learning, we have learned that we need to build in a scoping activity at the beginning of our digital project. You need to find a quick and efficient way of getting to know your audience. The questions to explore should include aspects such as learning and communication habits, existing infrastructure, and digital literacy skills. If you collect answers to such questions, you will be able to make informed decisions about the type of technology you will use and how you will use it. I can give you an example of one of the projects I'm currently working with, Assuring Quality Higher Education in Sierra Leone, short AQUET SL. The project management felt one of INA's online courses that introduces critical thinking to students would help the lecturers in Sierra Leone to strengthen their undergraduates' critical thinking skills. These skills had been identified as one very important aspect to get students ready for employment. The initial course version has been designed with some lecturer in Tanzania and involved 6 online self-study units that should be complemented by face-to-face lessons. After the launch of the project in 2018, we decided to use a workshop in Sierra Leone for a scoping activity with the lecturers. So we mainly asked questions and listened, and it became clear to us that an internet-based online course wouldn't work with the current infrastructure and digital literacy levels. We decided to form a task force of lecturers who received training to implement a learning approach that involved the use of small portable computers. You may know them as Raspberry Pis. These small computers can provide a local network in the classroom. The students are able to access the learning platform and the online course through mobile phones or other devices, while being supported by trained lecturers. The idea was to build critical thinking and digital literacy skills through this approach. But before we were actually ready to run a pilot of this learning approach, COVID-19 kicked in, and we had to adjust our approach again. Universities were closed and lecturers mainly stayed in contact with students through WhatsApp. So we took the contents of the online course and adjusted them so that they could be distributed to the students as snippets. Lecturers send now these one-pagers mostly through WhatsApp to the students and support their learning in WhatsApp groups. I hope this example demonstrates how important it is to stay in touch with your target audience and adjust learning opportunities to their needs. Our second recommendation is to design for an online experience and not just replicating face-to-face solutions. Too often, online learning is seen as simply changing the medium of delivery without changing pedagogy. We might be tempted to think, oh, we have got this workshop with all the slides, resources, activities. Why don't we put these materials online and scale up the learning opportunity to more people at a lower cost? The truth, however, is that interaction dynamics in online spaces are quite different to face-to-face settings. Online learning requires explicit and thought-through design. For example, when using asynchronous communication, you need to take into account the lack of visual clues and the delay of feedback. You should also utilize well the advantages that online spaces can bring. An example that I would like to give you here is our monitoring and evaluation course for librarians, which used to be offered as a 3-day workshop, face-to-face. We wanted to reach a broader audience with a limited budget. User groups that weren't able to come to the workshop, such as librarians in remote areas or women with family duties. So we decided to offer this learning opportunity online. Instead of having a workshop on Zoom or a similar platform, we realized that the greatest benefit for learners of doing this course online would be if they could do it in their own time and apply what they learn immediately within the context of their work. We developed a 6-week course, providing some theory with examples and at the same time encouraging participants to work on a useful assignment for their work. If the participants didn't have enough information to answer the questions in their assignment, they had enough time to talk to more knowledgeable colleagues and then continue with the assignment. Participants from the same institution even built learning groups and submitted a joint assignment. They were really learning by doing, and they were doing something which was directly relevant to and useful for their work at their workplace. Social presence is another key factor in maintaining participants' engagement on the course and reducing dropout rates. It helps learners know that they aren't alone in their learning journey and exchange ideas. So in many of our online learning initiatives, we build in peer learning activities and facilitated group discussions. However, keeping participants motivated and engaged is not always easy. Just to give you an example, in our massive open online courses, the MOOCs, we often have between 2,000 and 3,000 participants in one run. Therefore, to support the participants and engage them in discussions, we developed a guest facilitation model. The guest facilitators from all over the world help to keep conversations in the discussion forum flowing. The response from this global community has been amazing. Many people are happy to dedicate their own time to support others. It allows us to keep the thousands of participants engaged and motivated, and our completion rates are actually quite high, reaching about 50%. We believe this success is largely due to the guest facilitation model. But you really need to know your audience to be inclusive and design your learning initiative in the right way. For example, thinking of users who are displaced, differently abled, or in areas with only basic digital infrastructure. What have we actually learned about how best to serve learners in less accessible situations? Our courses should work quite well also with low bandwidth and be flexible time-wise. The right choice of media, colors, and fonts is important. For example, when we build in videos or live sessions, they aren't a compulsory element of the course completion, rather an enrichment of the learning experience. We design mostly for asynchronous communication and flexible due dates. We make online lessons downloadable. The learning resources can be accessed through mobile phones. Our learning never ends. For example, when speaking recently with a woman from Somalia, we have learned that female participants from Somalia can often find our MOOCs overwhelming and can feel uncomfortable to learn in a community that is dominated by male participants. We are now looking into options for delivering the same content for smaller communities with local facilitation and giving female participants a more private space. Last not least, another aim of our scoping activities is to build a sustainable model from the beginning. We want to make sure that we support lasting change and that the capacity development can continue once we are not longer involved. With this in mind, our course material is licensed as Creative Commons and developed and structured into packages that can be easily downloaded, customized, and embedded into partners' own digital platforms. And here, as promised, are the details of the new tutorial that I mentioned earlier, facilitating events and courses in an online world. Perhaps something for you if you want to learn more. And thanks so much now for listening, and I will give it back to Alison.
Thank you very much, Veronika. And I think some of the interesting things, again, that you've touched on for me include the inclusivity model and thinking about differently abled people and how they're going to access online conferencing. And again, that issue of community, right? Why are we gathering? You have built this new community of guest facilitators who not only are going to be guest facilitators for that brief moment in time when people are online, but if it's recorded, that their facilitation will stay there. And also, you've created a whole new set of champions for INASP, for your community. They suddenly become champions for your community as much as they become facilitators. So I love that. And I think that's, again, one of the lessons that we're learning, is that our communities that perhaps used to just travel to one destination, we now can expand that community to broader communities that we didn't get to before because of this online experience. So I think there are pros and cons, aren't there, of having the online versus in-person experience. Okay, so we're yet to hear from Wesley and Sam. So Wesley Shrum, can I bring you in from 4S? I'm really looking forward to your presentation and seeing what innovation your society has come up with during these times of COVID.
Well, thank you so much. I also have to tell you that just 2 seconds ago, there was a construction project started outside my house here, which is almost inevitable in the real world. But so Alison or anybody, just like raise your hand and say, it's too noisy, and I'll run into a different room. But right now we'll just go with it. So as introduced, I'm the meetings planner for the Society for Social Studies of Science. And I've been doing it for about 33 years now. And I think that what I think is important to know is that, I'll just be really direct here. We're having an academic meeting. This is a meeting of, oh, that's bad. Okay, I'm out of here. I'm gonna go to another room. This is an academic meeting and we are trying to make money. I'll just say that because, people do a lot of, they say a lot of different things, but we're trying to make money. We have to make money because we need this meeting to run our operations all year long. Membership dues, no, that didn't cut it. So we're trying to make money. And I think the ISC was sort of recognizing that, because they used to call it, in the merger talks, the magic 4S model. And I would say that we recognize that there is a contingent of people that want to think a lot about carbon footprints. And this is all very well and good, but I would say about footprints is that people vote with their feet. And so they come to a meeting to travel to see a city. And if you doubt that, then I would say, here's my rule of thumb. I will have to rent a hotel. Let me see. Okay, I'll put this here and I'll sit, and then I'll sit on the floor. Thank you, Anne. People come to see a city. And so if I rent a hotel, or if I rent a convention center, I would say about 1/4 of the registered participants will be in the building at any one time. Now we can take that or leave it, but I go into all sessions all the time. So what I want to tell about the 4S experience is that there was bad news, and then there was good news, and now we have some real fears going forward. So what we saw in advance back in March, April, May was a lot of disasters, including one meeting, which is very successful that I'm familiar with. They had a 95% drop off, and they only charged $10 or $15 to come to the meeting. It was a complete disaster. So, we spent several months, and our meeting this year came in August. So we had our August meeting, and we spent some months preparing for that. And I can tell you what the software plan was for that. But we ultimately made a decision to have a normal academic meeting. And I know it seems like a long way around to get to a short distance, but on analogy, I'm the co-editor of a journal of videos, and we were making all sorts of mistakes when we were trying to do a video journal in a different way than a regular journal. And once we figured out this is just a journal, it just uses videos instead of papers, then we got it together. In the same way, I think for 4S, the big innovation was to say, look, let's just run a normal meeting. Let's see how a normal meeting would work online. Okay, I know, again, it sounds like a weird thing, but that's what we did. So what we did was we used a series of mostly about 3 software protocols for our software stack. And we used Zoom, that was very important. We used a company called All Academic, which we use every year because they do our management of our submissions. And we looked at a variety of software systems to do that, but ultimately we realized that the one we had would work just fine. It took us quite a long time to decide that too. And then finally, we used a company out of Prague called Slides Live, and they were a firm that specialized in recording lectures and various things like that. And we used those for our plenary sessions. But for our major breakout sessions, we used Zoom, and that was it. So we did talk to the National Academies of Science in the US, and they briefed us on a lot of different programs, and they said they thought Zoom was the best, so we did it. Now, at the end, we were scared and all that, and we were very scared that we would have a massive failure on our hands. But at the end of the day, it was one of our best meetings ever. It was fabulous. And everyone was kind of stunned at how well it ran. So we had 25 parallel sessions for 4 days. And we went a little bit long because the meeting was meant to be a European meeting. So we started some days a bit earlier and some days a bit later. And we tried to cater a little bit for the other continents. But ultimately we had 25 parallel sessions for 4 days. And I think the key numbers here for everyone are that the submission of papers ended before the pandemic. So our maximum numbers would have been in the area of about 2,200 people at the meeting, if it had been a normal physical meeting. At the end of the day, we had 1,800. And 1,800 is a big number when you consider that they paid registration that was similar to a physical meeting. We didn't do $15. We said, no, registration is going to be not as high, but pretty high. So we just did it. And we, again, we thought, well, we'll probably have a big disaster. But, people paid the registration. We had 1,800 people attend, and we had 0 technical problems. I mean, nothing is 0, but we almost 0. What I do typically at a meeting is I go into every session. Like if it's at a hotel, I'll pop my head in, count the people, see how it's going. And I did the same thing at the Zoom meeting. So over the course of 4 days, I went to about 400 sessions. Granted, they were only for 5 minutes, but just to see how it was working. And I didn't see any technical problems. Sometimes someone had to say, hey, mute yourself, or the speaker would mute them. But that's not a serious technical problem. That's just a normal Zoom situation. Okay, now on attendance, I would say the attendance was, and I know this is a shocker, it was better. It was slightly better than at a live meeting. And I know I counted them, but at the same time, we had very good data that we could get from the Zoom meetings. If you look closely though, you see a lot of people who I would call in and outies. They pop in like me, and then they leave. And so, whether they attended the session, they're just looking at it and seeing what they thought. So I guess try to bring this to a close, and ask questions during the discussion sessions, but I don't want to go too long. I think basically we did something that we will not be able to do again. Now, why do I say that? Well, first, it was timing. We hit the sweet spot where we had time to learn how to do it and learn from the mistakes of other conferences, and before Zoom fatigue set in. Okay, we did a post-meeting survey. I won't say people didn't like the meeting. They liked it fine, but they just said, no, we don't want to do this again. They made it very clear on the post-meeting survey that they preferred an in-person meeting. And so, in about 2 months, I'm going to be able to see how it's going for our next meeting in Canada, because what we're going to do is everyone is going to say on their submission, on our submission platform, whether they would prefer to come in person if the pandemic has passed in that part of the world, or whether they would prefer to do the online meeting. So I think we're going to know in about 2 months, what's what for this coming October. And that's it.
Thank you, Wesley. And I think we'll probably talk about this in the chat, but again, something that Peter raised, and Peter, I'm sorry, I can't recall if it was this session today or yesterday, but the issue of in-person meetings and the supply chain. So the supply chain for hotels and flying and conference facilities, particularly if there's an expo. And again, on top of this, we also have to think about the sustainable development goals and living sustainably on the planet. So I think we'll talk a bit in the chat after Sam's presentation about hybrid conferences and what conferences are going to look like in the future. So Wesley, I'm interested to see what your community that obviously is really proud of your brand as a conference organizer, that they were happy to pay that amount and come to an online, I think speaks to the way that 4S organizes its conference and has a very strong relationship with your community. Okay, Sam, thank you for waiting.
Hello.
We're delighted to bring you in.
Just a second. I want to time myself. Okay, thank you. I want to thank ISC for the opportunity to be here. And I will cut straight to what I want to talk about. I first got involved in using the virtual spaces of what is now the internet back in the late 1980s, when we were using low Earth orbit satellites to connect researchers around the world with store and forward email. The big change came, of course, when Tim Berners-Lee at CERN invented HTML as a way for academics and researchers to better get data. And it became the World Wide Web, and everybody jumped on. So the growth of the World Wide Web created this vast virtual space. And what I want to talk about is not so much the experiences we've learned in the last few months from Zoom, which are a bit like a child with a hammer where everything looks like a nail. We've used Zoom and sort of synchronous virtual to solve a lot of problems. But I want to back up and say, where does this fit into the overall scientific ecosystem and the problems and issues that we're confronting in the overall scientific ecosystem? Doing anything synchronous with a bunch of people is difficult, even if they're in the same city or in the same institution and so forth. So doing virtual synchronous like Zoom has to be part of a bigger agenda of how we collaborate and work together and what the effects of that collaboration and working together is about. The big, really valuable part of the internet, of this virtual space, is the asynchronous part, that we can put things up there. The NS can say, there it is, go get it and use it when you need it. Augusta Maria said, well, what about the young, right? Well, the young want to go, young academics and scholars want to go to conferences because they want to learn, they want to be seen. Well, we need to use this whole space in a much more dynamic way for that. We have to address, for example, knowledge translation. Historically, we thought of knowledge translation as peer-reviewed journal articles to be read by our colleagues and maybe policymakers. Hopefully they'll do evidence-based policy. Now it's the public, everybody. We have to be speaking to everybody, or we get buried, as we are now, in false news, false knowledge, and so forth. So I want us, as we're thinking about this and the little solutions that we use to make a virtual conference work, or to make a virtual conference be a substitute for a literal conference. I've worked for years with ICANN that holds 3 large 4,000 or 5,000 person literal conferences around the world every year. It's had to switch to virtual. It's fairly complicated because it does policy. It doesn't just share knowledge. SASA, its conference for Uganda, has gone virtually completely. We're doing a series of sessions over several months. So what we need to do here is not just focus on what do we do in this synchronous virtual space, what tools do we use and so forth, but ask the bigger question, how does that fit into everything that we do? What are we trying to achieve here? Back to a comment by Augusta Maria, she said, you know, this is important for the young. Yes, how do we use this virtual system to empower the youth, young scientists, young academics, young researchers? How do we deal with inclusivity and discrimination? How do we deal with the long-running historical results of colonialism, where we still, in my country and in most of the countries of us in Europe and in the North, we still vacuum the rest of the world for expertise. The brain drain is because we don't invest. It's easier for us to go fishing. We have to look at how do we use this electronic space, not just Zoom, but the whole electronic space in terms of our wider missions. Our missions of not just advancing science in my field, I'm an economist, development economist, but how do we advance the role of science in the Sustainable Development Goals, in the Human Development Index, in the well-being, and dealing with marginalization, dealing with discrimination. So we've got all these really good, and I'd like to thank the people before me, little statements about this is how we solved our problem and this is what we have to worry about. But I want us to, at the same time, to stop and back up and take a deep breath and say, okay, what does this virtual space mean? Both the synchronous and the asynchronous parts. for what we do in our field and what science does in contributing to the future of humanity. Okay, I'll leave it at there, and thank you for the opportunity.
Sam, thank you so much. And I think your presentation was a really fantastic way to bring in all of the different discussions that we've been having today, because you know, when I think about this year, I mean, the ISC is one of the projects that we're doing revolves around combating racism and other forms of discrimination in science. And you know, you think about the way in which we gather and how difficult it is for some scientists, particularly those from Africa, to get a Schengen visa for Europe to attend a meeting. You think about whether we're going to need to have COVID passports for flying in the future. And so having that inclusivity for our field of science. And again, you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about science as a global public good for the good of humanity. And again, I want us to start thinking about things like sustainability principles. Actually, can I ask Anne if you could find our sustainability principles and just put them in the chat? Because I think this is going to, I think this year has given us the opportunity and time to reflect on how we gather within the fields of science. And, you know, we have to remember that Sam, you brought this up about the colonization of science. Well, at the same time that was going on, technology was moving forward, and there's a reason why the International Telecommunications Union is the oldest intergovernmental body in the world, because scientists didn't used to go in person. They used to have different ways of communicating, and now we suddenly find ourselves in this community asking, how do we gather, how do we share our science, how do we share our ideas to live sustainably within the planet, within planetary boundaries. Right, it's time to have a discussion. So I'm going to ask people if they want to share their camera screen, their video screens again. And if you have a question, to please use the raise your hand function, or just physically raise it so I can see it. But I'm first going to go to Pieter and just Pieter, can you give us some insights of what our four speakers have shared from your perspective as a professional conference organiser? And then let's go to some of the questions and issues that have been brought up in the chat.
Thank you, Alison. So you've been assuming that I've been quietly listening to all the presentations and making summaries. Unfortunately, I have been listening. So yes, extremely valuable insight shared by all the presenters today. And also sharing and connecting with Wesley. And Wesley, I'm absolutely with you in that room when you experienced the external disruptions to your presentation. And I quite like the way that you handled it in the fact that you shifted location, you kept engagement with the audience, but this comes down to the authenticity of the online engagements. That is really important. So how do we connect with each other in the online environment? Because we are all sitting in remote locations and we are sitting by ourselves. How do we feel part of this online community? And it comes down to that connection. So what we are unable to do is to connect with all five senses like an in-person event. Now we can only connect with sound and we can connect visually. But we don't have taste, we don't have smell, and we can't touch unless you build those sensory experiences. But that also relates to the emotions of design and being able to connect, to almost have empathy with your situation. Sam, Veronika, and or other presenters, thank you for your insights. I've got little to add. I'd rather open it up to people asking specific questions, and let's hit those questions.
So do people have questions that they wish to ask? I don't see any hands raised at the moment, so perhaps I can ask if is Pieter still with us? Pieter Guttorp?
Yes, I'm still here.
Yeah, Pieter, I'm interested if you want to share your experiences, because there was some chat about the timings of meetings and how do we cater for an international organisation. And you let people know that your solution was to have a meeting that went over a number of days. So are you able to share some of your experiences from that and what platform you used, and was voting involved, for example?
This is a meeting that we're planning.
Okay.
It was, let's see, it was supposed to happen at our World Conference in The Hague, and sort of our banner meeting, and this is the International Statistical Institute. And of course, we decided, I think this meeting takes place in July of 2021. And we decided in end of summer 2020 that it was not possible to hold it in real life. And so we're now working on selecting a platform, and one of the decisions that we've made is to have 1 or 2 core times every day. So this goes for 5 days. It was originally scheduled to go for 4. And what we've done is use every other day Amsterdam time, or The Hague time to be precise, partly because our permanent office is there, partly because that's a good time for Europe and Africa. And then we have so that's for 3 days. For 2 days, we have 2 sessions, one at Rio time, so UTC -3, and one at Tashkent time, UTC +5. So that takes care of everybody except New Zealand. Hawaii can manage. New Zealand is still very hard. That was the best we could do. And it does allow Asian countries to participate, and Australia.
Yeah, and that's certainly the solution that we're looking for our Electronic General Assembly in February next year, is to have different starting times to cater for different areas. Louise Friss Hansen has a question. Louise, do you want to come on and ask it yourself, or would you prefer that I read from the chat?
I'll just unmute.
Okay. So this is for you, Wesley. Off you go, Louise.
Yeah, I have 2 questions to Wesley. It was really interesting to hear about your experience with having so many sessions, because we are talking about lowering the number of sessions, definitely. But did you do anything else to also encourage the networking between the sessions, or did you only have sessions, or did you also do other activities to make attendees feel that they were kind of a community, that they felt that they belonged to this conference? And a second question is also, I was just a little curious, you said you had 1,800 participants online. How many participants do you normally have in your conferences? And then I have a third question, which is a little more general, because we are talking very much about how many participants can we expect. Do we expect lower because people are not necessarily interested in just attending webinars. They want this being together feeling. Or can we expect more people to attend? Because actually a lot of people can now have the possibility to attend, those who are normally not able to pay for, those who are not able to pay for travel and accommodation, staying in another place. The reason why I ask is that I have now attended several sessions that were really interesting. Just last week there was a UN gathering, and there were 45 people attending. There could have been, normally if it's in person, it's 150 people to 200. And then we had this 45 people. It was really, really disappointing. So are we trying to tell ourselves that we can reach out to others, but do anyone have experience in this?
Louise, I think that issue with the 45 people, I think many organisations are finding that people have webinar and Zoom fatigue at this point in the year, and I think part of it is, and again, Wesley spoke to this sweet spot of when they organise their online conference, and I do think part of it is people just want this year to be over and don't even have the brain space to do gathering at this point in the year. So I wouldn't feel too discouraged. But again, I think it speaks to being innovative for next year. Wesley, let's bring you in to respond to some of the issues that Louise has raised. And then I would like Sam to come on, followed by Veronika, to have a bit of a think about how we might have hybrid models where we're both in person and online. Wesley, over to you.
Okay, I would say 1,800 is a really good number, and our meetings are typically anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000, and sometimes we go a bit over 2,000, but we were at 1,800 was just outstanding. And in respect of the registration fees, you know, our argument, the argument that won the day was you don't have to pay for lodging, you don't have to pay for travel, you're only paying the registration. So it's going to be pretty close to normal because it's your only thing you have to pay. So that's what we argued. And again, I think it worked once. I don't think it's going to work a second time. But let's see, the other thing was the kind of sessions that we had. So we had basically three or four different kinds of sessions. One is just the standard meeting breakout rooms. We had about 25 simultaneous. Then we had plenary sessions, which were all pre-recorded using the software of the Prague company that I mentioned. And then we had some coffee breaks, we called them, and the informal interaction, and they were not well attended. And I think I mean, we made it available to people, but mostly people didn't come. And we also gave people the option of if they wanted to pre-record their session, and it's just a regular breakout session, they could do that too. And also those weren't all that well attended. So I thought that was meaningful as well. For us, what a hybrid meeting means, which we may do in Toronto next year, next October, is that some sessions are fully online and some sessions are fully in person. And in-person sessions can have at most one participant remote in, and that's at the discretion of the session chair. So that's the way we would do it.
Thanks, Wesley. So before we go to Sam, we're just going to do another quick poll. This is a test to see if you're still all listening. So we just want to do a quick poll about hybrid events. And so would you attend an international hybrid conference that has a localized in-person event and international online plenaries? So let's have a look. So yes, that's a great idea, or I would prefer a 100% online event, or I would prefer a hybrid event with one in-person event location only. Yeah, okay. So interesting again. It's people. It's kind of a great idea. Is heading around 60% with. I would prefer 100% online, and I would prefer with just one location, about the same. Okay. Sam, let's bring you in. I mean, ICANN obviously is, you know, it's you've worked with ICANN, and now you're with the Society for the Advancement of Science in Africa, SASA. But I mean, obviously ICANN is, you know, at the top of its game when it comes to the internet and online.
Sure.
So I'm interested to hear from you about hybrid events and yeah,
Okay. Yeah. First, let me just say a bit about ICANN for those of you who don't know it. ICANN is in charge of the top-level domain management of the security and stability of the top-level domain system, domain names in the internet, except for the country domain names. And it has always had money to hold major events, 3 global events every year around the world. Its technical staff and its technical equipment were loaded on freighters in containers and shipped to the location, so they didn't even have to depend on the local technology to support what they were going to do. So they're very generously endowed for this. They would have 2,000 to 5,000 participants with 8 to 10 parallel sessions running for 4 days. Well, it had to go virtual this year, of course. So it went virtual, but it used the same model. We had 8 to 10 parallel sessions running at the same time, all on Zoom. But the 2 things that were distinctive about ICANN compared to other places is that the meetings are about decision-making, about policy-making, A, and B, all of the documents, almost all of the documents are preloaded in the archives, be read in advance. If you're having a meeting, you may have a document that's scrolling that you've read before just to say, this is where we are. So the important thing I think that I've learned from this over almost 40 years is, what are you trying to achieve? Not just what are you trying to achieve at your event, but how does this event fit into your overall vision and mission and mandate as an organization? And I would say in these days, as one of the denizens of the scientific ecosystem, because there are all kinds of issues coming up there. For SASA, where I'm one of the major diversity components, we were going to hold our session in Uganda and Kampala this year. We just went to a multi-week Zoom thing, and we've gotten 30, 40, 50 participants each time. The last thing I want to say is to come back to something that I think you said, Alison. If there's one 5-letter word that has driven me absolutely crazy trying to run conferences, not just with SASA and other places, it's the following word: visa. Getting a visa. I have almost had to catch prime ministers, in their bedrooms to sort out visa problems, and mostly they're stupid visa problems. Yep. They're not serious. Or in a place like Africa, you may have to go to the next country to apply for a visa. So we, and I think the scientific community has to take some responsibility for that as well, and say, okay, how do we talk to our government officials and say, look, we need this collaboration. I'll finish by a little anecdote that's an interesting one. Huawei is now like the world's leading producer of 5G telecommunications equipment. They basically did that with one Turkish researcher and Nortel, a collapsed Canadian company. That how it collapsed is interesting, but they sourced the expertise from around the world to become the dominant player in that field. The same thing has happened with collaboration around the virus, the vaccines. So it's how do we use this within a system, not just how do I do it with my little group, my little special interest group, or my birds of a feather. And so I think we now have a moral obligation to look much larger at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what its impact is.
Thanks, Sam. Oh, no, I'm fine. Thanks, Sam. And again, that broader challenge that you've provided us about how do we actually change science systems to respond to today's global challenges, and how do we do that when we gather. I'm going to ask Veronika to say a few words, and then I'll also ask Peter to come in again because he's been busy with the chat, so he might like to just reiterate some of the things that he's been putting in the chat. So Veronika, over to you.
Yeah, first, maybe I want to say that we are not organizers of big conferences usually. We are more facilitating workshops for training, learning purpose. And when we speak to the partners in our countries that are more in the global south, we usually get the answers, oh, actually, we prefer face-to-face meetings. But then there are more the necessities kick in, that they look at their budgets, what they have, how many people could we reach, or are there certain users, certain participants that actually could not attend because they are not able to travel to the workshop location. Now, of course, COVID-19 kicked in, where there were travel restrictions. And then they often think again, and we came then up with sometimes with such hybrid possibilities that support then this wish of face-to-face communication and combine them with online learning. For example, in one of our courses, then the people decided they would build study groups at their own institutions, but still going through this online learning event, communicating on discussion forums, also with other participants of the course. But they had also their own small groups where they could discuss things face to face, and that was one solution to facilitate this wish of having face to face connection with other people. Sometimes we also do it in this way, that we prepare online events to keep the time that we need then for workshops shorter, because also that helps sometimes certain users, for example, women often that have to care for their children, or they appreciate it if it's not such a long event where they need to stay overnight or something like that. That is a possibility. Yeah, I think that's what
yeah, no, this is great. And again, I think this is about what this knowledge sharing session is all about. And I think so many different issues today have been raised. Peter, but we've got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to come back to you to maybe take this time to just expand on some of the things that you've said in the chat. And then I don't think there are any more questions, so let's go to Peter.
Thank you, Alison. Maybe if I can just take a moment and talk about hybrid conferencing. Most of us have a lot of experience of organizing in-person events, and now also gained the capacity to organize fully digital events, full online events. Very few actually have the experience of organizing a hybrid event. So first and foremost, what exactly is a hybrid event? A hybrid event is an event where you have an in-person event and an online event running in parallel, and that your online event actually feeds its content from the in-person event. Originally, before COVID time, hybrid conferences was used as part of a strategy to attract attention and awareness about your in-person event. So hybrid conferences were really, the online part of it was really designed in a way that pretty much similar to putting the carrot out. giving a little exposure to your in-person event, and to create FOMO, that fear of missing out, so that in future we can convert online participants to attend the in-person events. That way, part of the strategy was then you would broadcast not all your sessions, but only some of your presentations, and then leave people wanting for more. That wanting for more is then to return to a future in-person event. That strategy going into the future will now change entirely. With the experiences that we had with the online, so that your hybrid conference will now be able to push out all the content to your online audience, and then merging your online audience with your in-person audience, so to create that interaction between the two. The reason for that is there's a lot of value for attending an in-person event. People connect physically with each other for specific purposes. When you want to talk business, the best way to conduct business is one-on-one in real life. It is difficult to have that same impact in a business discussion with somebody online. Of course, it can be done, but it doesn't really have that same impact. In today's environment, you don't need to travel to a conference anymore in order to access a specific speaker. Most of us have the capability and the means to connect to people directly who we need to talk to. So I want to leave everybody with a question, thinking about the purpose of meetings. So that question is, what can you achieve as a collective that an individual cannot? And continuously ask that question as you design your program and your engagement, whether it's in person, return to in person at a digital environment, or within a hybrid environment. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Peter. I have to say, from a personal point of view, I mean, you know, I absolutely want the science community to practice what's being discussed, particularly, you know, with living sustainably. And so my vision is, you know, I hope that international conferences will have hybrid models where there are clusters in different regions around the world, so we're not using up all those air miles. And I'm sure that technology is going to move very quickly so that we're going to get some level of in-person experience. Sorry, it's my cat. It's the problem of working at home. So that you get that in-person, that in-person experience. And I know definitely from the conferences that I've been to, that networking that happens over lunch, or the networking that happens at the bar across the road from the conference, or at the breakfast where you have those one-to-one meetings, is when those ideas and those visions for collaboration come in, and that is one of the things that has definitely been changed or lost somehow in this our pandemic year. Okay, I think we're about ready to wrap things up. So I want to thank all of our members and participants for coming on, and particularly I want to thank our guest speakers for taking the time to present today. We've really appreciated your inputs. This session has been recorded, and we'll reach out to all of our people who've joined today with the slides and the recording, and also the recording from yesterday, which some of the presentations were different. So at some point we'll put all of this together into one knowledge sharing session. And I want to encourage you to continue to visit the membership notice board that Anne Thiem, our membership officer, has created, which is where these different knowledge sharing ideas will go. And I want to wish you all a very good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are in the world. And I take this time to say thank you and goodbye until we meet again.